Good morning.
Morning.
Oh,
Good morning.
or afternoon.
Afternoon. It's afternoon. I went with a good morning. Well, French people say good morning when they haven't seen you since all morning.
I like that.
Yeah, they will say good morning even at nighttime if they haven't seen you that day.
I like that. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Juliana Valencia Banks. I am the Outreach and Operations Manager for the Esperanza Center. I am going to go ahead and get started. I think we've got everyone that was scheduled to participate. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box or ask to be unmuted, and that way you'll be able to ask. The presentation I have today is quite long. I don't like, one of the things I don't like about Zoom is that I'm talking to screens and I'm not able to interact as freely as I would like with folks because of this virtual environment that we're in. For those of you that don't know, the Esperanza Center is a comprehensive immigrant resource center that is part of Catholic Charities of Baltimore. So we are one of the 80 programs that Catholic Charities of Baltimore has. And our program operates to help immigrants. Before I continue, is everybody okay with being muted, or I'm sorry, not muted, but recorded? We're good. We're good. All right, so we will be recording this presentation, and I will stop recording when we're doing the Q&A portion. So your questions won't be recorded, but we will record the presentation. All right, so we are now going to start our presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you're able to see what I'm presenting with a thumbs up. Really appreciated the thumbs up. Perfect. So like I said, my name is Juliana. I work at the Esperanza Center. Our program provides different resources for immigrants, everything from free primary and preventive health care to immigration legal services that are low cost or free, English classes, assistance for families that are being reunited with children that came into the country unaccompanied or by themselves, our client services program that serves as a safety net for folks that need assistance in something that isn't covered in one of our 4 different programs, such as translations or notarizations or just general community assistance. What we're going to talk about today are some of the changes that have happened under the Biden administration and what the Biden-Harris administration are looking to do when it comes to immigration. So in the first 100 days, even sooner than that, right? We've seen some immediate action by the administration. They've reinforced what DACA is, so Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This is the Obama era program that allowed young people that entered the country as minors to be able to apply for a status called DACA that would let them get a social security card, get a work permit, and be protected from deportation. What this program did not do was create a pathway to citizenship. But the previous administration made various attempts to stop that program. And so what the Biden administration has done is basically said the program is going to be reinstated to what it was previously, and it is going to continue to abide by the previous regulations. The administration has also requested that different priorities for deportation be removed. They've also gone ahead and said that they're committing to studying the current policies and review enforcements and review it and make new recommendations based on what they're finding. What's also happened is they've ended the separation of children. They've actually condemned it, saying that to intentionally separate children from their parents or legal guardians is wrong. So they've ended completely this practice, and they've established a task force to help reunite families that were separated under the previous administration. They've also suspended what's called MPP, the Migration Protection Protocol program that was enacted by the previous administration. That MPP, what it did is created a ticketing system or a line system where folks had to wait in the southern border in very dangerous conditions for an opportunity to apply or to ask for asylum or to ask for refuge in this country. So this administration has suspended enrollments to that program, and is starting to look at how to reopen some of the borders, some of the policies that were ended because of the previous administration, right? And they're also looking to revisit how the United States welcomes refugees, how our country works with refugee settlements. And so all of this is being studied, being changed, and we will see what happens in the next few months, few years, right? The Immigration and Nationality Act is the set of rules that govern immigration. That act was established in 1952. It has changed many times. I always say, if you think about our immigration laws, they're kind of like the very first cell phone you ever had, which is probably something like this size, super clunky, and you couldn't do much with it. And now, we are all on our smartphones, we're all texting, we're looking up things on our phones, we're ordering food, different things like that. That's the INA, right? It's started like an old time cell phone, and it's kind of been stuck there for about 20 some years. It hasn't really changed. It's not a new iPhone, but the rules of laws that govern our immigration laws is called the INA. And you'll hear me refer to the INA quite frequently. And I'm sorry, I hang out with a lot of immigration attorneys. So oftentimes I use acronyms, and I think everybody understands what they are. So just flag me if you have a question, or put it in the chat. Really quickly, before we begin talking about the proposal that the administration has made, I just want to review really quickly how a bill becomes a law, right? So we've got this bill. It's 364 pages. The immigration bill that the administration has proposed is 364 pages. I've condensed it to, I believe, 27 slides from a 60-page summary. But I want to just review and make sure we all know that a bill is proposed, a bill goes and is edited, revisited, it goes to Congress, it goes to the Senate. It has to be passed by both the Congress and the Senate in order for it to be turned over to the president, who can decide to either sign it or not sign it. And that's how we get a law. It takes many months. It takes a lot of negotiation. It takes a lot of giving and taking, redrafting. So while this immigration bill that the Biden-Harris administration has proposed is very comprehensive, we may see it change over time, and we may see some parts of it completely stripped. So the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 creates a pathway of citizenship to folks that are currently undocumented. It includes their spouses and the children of the principal undocumented immigrant. This act would provide a pathway to citizenship to approximately 11 million undocumented immigrants. These folks have to have been physically present in the United States on January 1st, 2021. So it does not include any of the folks that are coming up now. You had to have been physically present on January 1st, 2021. And there are many different requirements for this. And so we will go through some we will look at the highlights of it, right? We will look at the big parts that are the ones that are getting the most traction. So one of the first things I like to talk about is that the act strikes the term alien from the INA. So before I became a US citizen, I was considered an alien. And last time I checked, I might sometimes be a funny looking gal, but I've never been green. I've never been a Martian. So being called an alien was a little bit dehumanizing. So the proposed
You call me?
2021 rule will strike that term and instead call them non-citizens. What this new proposed law does is it talks about a new status. It's the adjustment of status for eligible entrants. So people that are here or that have entered previously, and it changes them from being undocumented to lawful prospective immigrants, LPI, lawful prospective immigrants. Notice that it does not say residents, it does not say citizens, lawful prospective immigrants. This new section that's added to the INA would grant prospective immigrant status to not only the primary immigrant, but also their spouse and children. They would have to submit an application, each person, right? So the spouse and children would have to submit an application along with the primary immigrant. It's not a separate petition, but it's one together. This application will include a criminal background check. So anytime anyone submits an application with immigration, they do a criminal background check. They do what's called a biometrics. So they go and they submit their fingerprints. And as we know, if you've ever had any interaction with law enforcement, whether it's immigration or your normal police officers, they print you. So everything about you is in your fingerprints. So these folks are going to fill out an application. They're going to get printed to make sure that they don't present a national security danger, that they are not going to be a problem, that they don't have very severe criminal histories. And they're going to pay a fee. They're also going to pay to do this, right? This proposal will give these LPIs 6 years where they're going to be able to work with a social security number. They're going to be able to work with permission, have a social security number, and they have to, again, pass a background check in order to go from being an LPI, a lawful prospective immigrant, to being a green card holder. So these folks are going to live as LPIs for 6 years, and they'll get a card that says that they're an LPI along with their social security card. And then after 6 years, they're going to be able to apply for their green card. They're going to be able to apply to become lawful permanent residents of the United States. The LPI will be considered lawfully present in the United States for all purposes except for certain ACA benefits and tax credits, okay? So even though these folks are going to be living here and they're going to be paying for taxes, even though they'll continue to pay federal taxes, pay state taxes, they're still not going to be eligible for certain benefits. So they're not immediately going to do what many people say that undocumented folks do and, burden the system, right? They're not going to be eligible for certain federal programs. LPIs will also be authorized to travel. So when you talk to somebody that's lived here and has been undocumented, many of them have spent years without being able to go home. Many of them, it's been decades since they saw a family member. For some young children, some young people, I've got a very good friend who's 20 and he hasn't been home since he was 3. So what LPIs will be able to do is they'll be able to travel to home country, to their country of origin. They can't stay there for more than 180 days, and they'll be able to come back with permission. They'll have to apply for a travel document, and then they'll be able to come back into the United States with permission. Previously, if you've lived undocumented, goes years without you being able to see your family. These are some of the different requirements to apply for the LPI status, right? You have to submit an application, you have to do a background check, you have to pay fees. When you go from LPI to LPR, to lawful permanent resident, you'll go through a very similar process of filling out an application, of paying fees, of getting a background check, and it will be at least 5 years from LPI to LPR. Now we're going to talk about another section of, well, first of all, let me take a little break here and see, does anybody have any questions so far about the LPI status? Bob, you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
I did. It's more so just about the U.S. Citizenship Act itself.
Okay.
I was just wondering, have there been curious versions of that same measure introduced before at the federal level, of course? But I was also wondering if it seems like there was. I was just wondering if there were any other precedents at other levels of government for that kind of legislation, at least at a more regional or statewide level.
So immigration policy is federal, right? So no state can enact immigration laws. They can change state laws, but they cannot enact immigration laws. Different parts of this act have been introduced, like the DREAM Act, which is the part that we're going to talk about next, has been introduced at various points in the last 10 years. Probably more than that, and has not passed hasn't passed one of the houses, right? So in order to become a law, you have to pass both. It hasn't been able to. So we'll go back to sharing the screen and go back to the presentation. And for instance, one of the things.
Question, please.
Sure.
So with the LPI, when that is passed, and when they get the authorization, are they supposed to be working? You know how they give you 1 year work permit? Is it going to be like renewable like that, or just the 5 years extended?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I have a feeling it's probably going to be a 2-year work permit or something that you can renew. I have a feeling it will be something that's renewable just because of the way immigration is. I have a feeling it'll be something that you have to renew, but you'll be able to finally have the blessed number, right? You'll be able to get your work permit. You'll be able to get a social security number. So going back, we're going to talk about the DREAM Act.
Can I just ask a question before you
Sure.
go? I kind of missed the first part because I was trying to get my computer to work. Who will qualify for the lawful perspective in it?
Any undocumented immigrant that has been physically present in the United States January 1st, 2021, and is able to pass a background check and is able to do this application.
Okay.
So we're talking about a prospective immigration reform that will cover upwards of 11, I don't know why I can't say 11 today, 11 million undocumented folks.
Okay, so those who have been in the, okay, thank you.
All right. So dreamers, as I mentioned, are young people that are brought into this country as minors, and they've lived here. They've gone to school here. They've either completed high school or have gotten their GED, and they don't have any severe, serious criminal history. What the DREAM Act portion of the Immigration Act of 2021 is going to do is going to allow the secretary to adjust the status of certain young people that were brought to the United States to LPR status, right? So this is the adjustment of status of certain non-citizens who entered as children. They have to meet the eligibility requirements of the security and safety of the country, right? They have to pay the fees. They have to have been under 18 when they entered the United States. They have to have completed high school or gotten a GED or some kind of high school equivalency. Additionally, they have to have completed 2 years of college or a program that's post-secondary level, technical school, be in college. They have to have served in the US Armed Forces or been discharged honorably if they're not in school. And they also have to work unless they are in school. This program will allow current dreamers. So if you're currently a DACA holder, meaning that you were able to apply for DACA before the the previous administration, it will allow these folks to bypass and get their green card. So if you currently have DACA, are renewing DACA, you'll be able to get your green card. The spouses and children of current DACA holders would also be able to adjust their status under this section of the Immigration Act of 2021. The act also addresses the needs of TPS holders. As we know, many folks that have TPS or temporary protected status have been living in the United States for decades, right? They left home country because of a natural disaster or political instability. They have been applying for TPS every 18 months. Currently, to apply for TPS, it's $495. These folks, similar to dreamers, have to pass a background check in order to obtain their status. Like DACA, TPS did not create a direct pathway to citizenship. So you could have DACA, you could have TPS, live and work in the United States with permission, but not be eligible for citizenship because you had these statuses. So what this act is doing is giving permission for folks that have TPS to become LPRs, to become lawful permanent residents of the United States. You have to have been physically present in the US since January 1st, 2017, have had TPS or deferred enforcement departure, which is very similar to TPS. And again, be able to pay the fee, pass a background check, submit the application. But these folks will be able to have their green card. It will also include their children and their spouses. There are what we call mixed status families. So it's a family where a parent may have TPS and their spouse is undocumented, The oldest child might have DACA and the younger children may be US citizens. And so you're living in a mixed status household. What the American Promise Act section of the Immigration Act of 2021 will do is it will cover these spouses and children so that they're also able to get their green card. This act also includes a section for agricultural workers. So as most of you know, this country relies heavily on agricultural workers to do some of the hardest labor imaginable. And what this section of the act will do is it will permit the adjustment of status of these folks to a green card holder. So we're talking about folks that come year after year, work our farmlands to be able to get their green card. Again, it's the same process. They have to pass a background check, make sure that they're not a security risk, submit applications, and pay these fees. There's sections about how many hours they have worked for how many days in order for them to be able to adjust their status under this section of the act, which is the Agricultural Workers Adjustment Act. The Immigration Act of 2021 is a 363-page document. And so it has many different sections. And what this act will do is it will change the Immigration and Nationality Act. The INA, the Immigration Nationality Act, is the immigration laws that govern how we create immigration laws and how we adjust status, who we grant status to. And so what this act will do is it will revisit what agricultural labor or services means, and it will provide a pathway to the spouses and children of these folks so that they may also be able to get their green card. I'm going to pause for a minute, see if anybody has any questions.
I do have a question just about the mixed status households. If you wouldn't mind going through that again, what would the Citizenship Act do? Would it expand the eligibility for green cards? Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. So for instance, if you've got a family where one spouse is undocumented, has nothing, their spouse has TPS or has DACA, and their children are US citizens, that undocumented spouse will be able to qualify for a green card based on their dreamer spouse. So husband has DACA, wife doesn't.
Okay.
Because the husband is able to apply and get his green card, he'll be able to bring over the wife into green card status as well.
And that would also work with respect to the children. Like I guess the example you gave was the oldest say might be DACA, the other children
Exactly.
are already citizens.
Already, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you've got the case of TPS holders, right? One spouse might be from Honduras and has been living here for 20 years with TPS, but his Mexican wife is undocumented and they have a 20-year-old child who's unmarried and has DACA, and they might have 16 and 17-year-old kids that are US citizens. When that TPS person is able to get their green card, their wife will also be able to get the green card, and their 20-year-old dreamer child will also be able to get their green card. So that act will cover the entire family.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Oh, Java had his hand up. Okay, I'll just go first. So just following up with that question, so the children will have to be under 21, right? To be considered under that.
Unmarried and under 21.
21, okay. Secondly, with TPS, I was going to ask, I'm not sure how that status is, but it's my understanding that some people seeking for asylum, for example, who have not been granted because I don't know why they have gone for the interview, they haven't heard back, you know, that backup in the system. Are they considered TPS? I'm not sure.
No,
Okay.
no, completely different status. So the way asylum works is you present either at the northern or southern border, or you're flying in. And when you get to, you know, Border Patrol and they're looking at your passport, you tell the officer, I'm seeking asylum. If you're admitted into the country, if they let you in, then you have a year to apply for asylum, to submit your application that says that you are seeking asylum. Once your application is received, you will start the process, and it can take years. We've got clients at Esperanza that applied for asylum in 2015, and because of the backlogs in immigration court, they've only had one hearing, and during that hearing, they were told, we're going to schedule your hearing in 2020. Well, what happened in 2020? We closed everything down. And so you got a notice saying your hearing is postponed until 2022. So these folks will continue to live in a strange limbo process. Yomari and then Jabbar.
I know first 100 days in the office. I know Biden completed 50 million vaccinations of the people in the US. And what's going to happen for the next 37 days? What's going to happen if it's going to get 100 million vaccinations? What's going to happen?
So we're talking today about immigration, not the vaccination process. Unfortunately, I couldn't answer that. Yamadi?
Yes, I have a question. With all these people who, because the previous administration, the DACA and the TPS expired, and all that situation about the expired with the paper, did that will be influenced when they start to submit all the paperwork for them?
No, so the previous administration, as you well mentioned, made several attempts to end TPS and end DACA, but various court systems found in favor of TPS holders and dreamers. And so TPS did not fully end. It was just being kind of put on pause until it's heard in court. And so what this administration has committed to doing is restoring TPS and going back to a date prior to the administration. So these folks whose TPS has expired, or just their card expired, right? The physical card, because the status is still present, they won't be affected by those negative policies. So they'll be able to continue. All right, any other questions? All right, we're gonna go back to the presentation. All right, another section of the act that's really important to highlight is that this act is also addressing the reason why folks are leaving, right? Folks don't leave home because they want to. Most folks that are leaving Central America are being forced out, whether it's because of political instability or because of natural disasters or civil unrest. So these folks that are being forced out of their country, if given a choice, would probably stay if these things that were forcing them out were addressed, right? If Central America was politically stable, if it was safe, if folks didn't have to fear for their life because of gangs or corrupt politicians or the drug cartels, they would most likely not leave. If the impact of natural disasters that that have occurred because of climate change weren't impacting these countries so severely, perhaps folks would stay. And so one of the parts of the act that addresses it is strategies for the engagement in Central America. And what this does is it directs the government to implement a 4-year strategy to advance reforms in Central America. It's asking to address the political instability. It's asking to address justice, climate change. It's wanting to target those things that are forcing families out. It's wanting to address the things that are forcing children to leave home. In addition, these changes are going to combat corruption. They're going to disrupt the money laundering that is happening at the hands of these drug cartels and these gangs. It's going to address trafficking of humans. It's going to promote and respect the respect for human rights and labor and freedom of the press. It's going to hopefully create more stability in these Central American countries and address the underlying cause of poverty and inequality that is forcing people out. So, as we know, in order for a bill to become a law, it has to pass through both of the houses. And so some of the challenges that we know are going to happen are because this is a 363-page bill. It has many different sections. It has many different proposals that will most likely be held up in negotiations, right? So in order for a bill to pass, there's negotiations. It's a give and take, right? I will give you this if you give me this. And so what many folks that do this for a living, that study policy for a living, are suggesting will happen is that various parts of the act are going to be split off and to be submitted as individual acts, different proposals, right? So what we're thinking, for instance, is that the DREAM Act will become its own proposal, that it will become its own bill. That the TPS portion of it, the American Promise Act, will become its own individual portion. And so perhaps we don't get this comprehensive 363-page bill passed, but will address the needs of dreamers, will address the needs of TPS holders. Perhaps it'll look at how we view unaccompanied minors. Maybe it'll create a pathway for these young people that enter without a biological parent to adjust their status quicker. Currently, if a child under 18 enters the country without a biological parent, these young people are considered unaccompanied minors. They are processed in a very different way than an adult is. They go from immigration to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and ORR processes them. They house them in shelters for young people where they have access to education, they have access to some health care. And we assume that about 95% of the unaccompanied minors that come into the US, we believe that about 95% of them have a family member, whether it's a biological parent or an older sibling, Sometimes it's a godparent or a good family friend that is willing to sponsor the child, that is willing to take care of that child. But in order for that child to be reunified with this sponsor, they have to go through a process, right? You don't just show up to the shelter and say, I want Joe. You know, you have to apply, you have to fill out an application, you have to get your fingerprints, because we want to make sure that these young people aren't being turned over to somebody that could cause them harm. And so this process does take several weeks. Sometimes it takes months. Esperanza has a family reunification program, and that program helps the family members, the sponsors, fill out the extensive application that, by the way, is in English, and helps them get background checked so that they can start that process. It used to take about 60 days. During the previous administration, it took a lot longer. And then last year, because of the virus, kids stopped being allowed in. So they were stuck on the other side of the border. And when they were let in, they were let into what we now commonly describe as, you know, cages, baby jails. And that process became even harder. And so we were processing, you know, anywhere between 20 to 30 applications for reunification each month. We started processing 3 or 4. What's happened since the election is the journey of families migrating north has started again. It never stopped. What happened was people were being held up at the border. And so as the number of young people coming into the country increases because of pandemic related health concerns, many of the shelters that were created previously during the Obama administration are not at capacity. You can't house 200 young people in a shelter safely. There has to be a limit to the number of kids in each shelter. And so what's happening is emergency shelters are being set up for the safety of the kids, because you don't want them to be in a at capacity shelter because of the virus, right? Kids or families enter, they quarantine for 2 weeks, and then they get moved around. And so this act of 2021 is proposing a change to how we treat these young people. Unaccompanied minors that are eligible for a form of relief called special immigrant juvenile status, these young people, a family court in a state has to find that it's not in their best interest to go back home. So they have either suffered abuse, abandonment, or neglect at the hands of one or both of their parents. And the state court finds that these kids should not go back home, and that there is somebody here in the US that is willing to take care of them. This process used to take about 2 years. You know, in 2016, 2017, an unaccompanied minor came in, was released to the sponsor started the state court process, the state court process was granted, then they would apply for the special immigrant juvenile status, and then it would get approved, and then they would get their green card. It used to take about 2 years on the long end. Now it's taking upwards of 5 to 6 years. The act is proposing some changes. The Act of 2021 is also proposing some changes to the consideration of Central Americans as refugees. Do folks here know the difference between an asylum seeker, an immigrant, and a refugee? Does anyone want me to explain that difference?
Please do.
I know.
Purpose of this.
Yes, 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 please.
So how many of us call the folks that are waiting at the border refugees? Because that's what we think they are, right? Like they are seeking refuge. Well, refugee status is something that is designated in home country.
Right.
Somebody does not come into the US and become a refugee. They get assigned that status in home country, and that status is assigned by the UN. There is a long, arduous, years-long process of vetting that individual. So that individual has to go through background check. They have to prove that they fear persecution. They have to prove that their government isn't willing or able to protect them. And then they live in refugee camps for years, and then they resettle in a third country. When they resettle in that country, they enter that country as refugees. So speaking specifically of the United States, a refugee comes into the country with refugee status. A year after they have entered the United States, they are able to apply for their green card. Because this person entered the country with permission, they entered as refugees, they are also eligible for an employment authorization. So they have permission to work. These folks also have access to different social services. They're connected to resources by resettlement agencies, the agencies that help refugees. They'll have access and information about English classes. They'll have access to housing assistance, mental health support. So refugees come in and they have access to all of these different things. They have access to healthcare. Somebody that's applying for asylum shows up either at the northern or southern border and says, I'm facing persecution in my home country, and my home country is unable or unwilling to protect me. The persecution has to be based on things that you cannot change about yourself. I cannot change that I am a national of Peru. I was born in Peru. That's my nationality. I cannot and will not change that I am a practicing Catholic. I will not change my political affiliation. These persecutions have to be because of very specific things in order to gain asylum. If we think about Central America, and we think about what's going on in Central America as in regards to the gangs, gang persecution is generalized, right? Every Central American fears the gangs, unless they're a gang member. And even if they're a gang member, they fear the gangs. Everybody will be threatened. There's nothing special about you if you get threatened by a gang. And that sounds really, really harsh, right? So how is this girl saying that nobody's special because they got threatened by a gang? That's how our immigration courts see it. There's nothing special about you. There has to be something special about why you're being persecuted by the gangs. So if the gangs are persecuting me because I'm a member of the Applejacks political party, that's something different. Or if they're persecuting me because I am of a particular faith that opposes the gangs, that's persecution because of your religion, right? So you show up at the northern or southern border and you ask for asylum. Sometimes you fly in because you have a student visa or you have a tourist visa, and you tell the Border Patrol agent, you say, at the airport, I fear persecution in my home country. Or you're here, you entered as a student from a country overseas in Africa, and suddenly the situation changes there and it becomes too dangerous for you to go home. You can apply for asylum. When you enter the country, you have 1 year to apply for asylum. So I'm a Central American woman with 2 minor children. I don't speak the language and I don't have money to find an attorney. But I've been allowed into the country because I fear persecution, because I'm a Central American woman, business owner that the gangs have targeted. Doesn't matter that I don't speak the language. It doesn't matter that perhaps I don't know that I'm supposed to apply for asylum. It doesn't matter that I never received a court hearing. I have 1 year to apply for asylum. And if I miss that year deadline, my ability to apply for asylum basically goes out the window because I missed that 1 year deadline. Just because you apply for asylum does not mean you have benefits, right? I apply for asylum, I submit my application. Well, guess what? There's years long worth of backlog to get my immigration hearing, to be able to talk to a judge and show that I deserve asylum in this country. If an application is submitted, and if the application is submitted correctly, and if the application meets all of the requirements set by the government, then that person may be eligible for a work permit after 180 days. But if that application is submitted incorrectly, if there's an inquiry about the application, if something happens that makes this fictitious clock stop, this 6 months stop. And so you may have to wait longer before you're able to get a work permit. So if you're able to get that work permit, you're able to work in the US while you wait for your court hearing, right? Like I said, most of the hearings last year stopped because of COVID. And so you're living in limbo. You don't have status. You're not accessing all of the services that a refugee has. You're just living in limbo. Somebody that's completely undocumented doesn't have any of that, doesn't have the work permit, doesn't have the social benefits. They don't have access to healthcare. They don't have access to assistance. They're not eligible for stimulus checks. They're not eligible for unemployment. They live a completely different life than refugees. They live a very different life than what asylum seekers might live. But there's the difference basically between a refugee and asylee is where you get the status. Refugees get the status overseas. Asylees are looking for the status here. Any questions on that?
Yes. What about, speaking about refugees, I'll speak particularly in Africa, we know how it goes there. There are crises where the government has decided to refuse. It's not a crisis because they want to look good in the international community and they know better. We all know, but somebody is out there benefiting and ripping off the resources from the West. So they're not going to say nothing. And we know what is happening, but they will not grant you that refugee status because, like I said, for their benefit. What do such a person do when you are caught up in that political stuff? What do you do?
I wish it was simple, right? I wish there was like a yes or no answer. It's one of those things. I mean, we've represented folks at Esperanza that have left their home country, their country of origin, and gone to a second or third country sometimes, literally making a journey by foot, traveling from country to country where they can at least find refuge. It's not, unfortunately, it's not a simple answer. It's one of those things where that's where we see where so many of the things in our immigration system are so broken, right? There's so many issues that are at play, that there is no perfect system, that, you know, the system that we currently have has to be updated somehow, whether it's by passing the 2021 bill or passing certain sections of it, right? In the current bill, there's a section that addresses the needs of refugees, right? The previous administration completely gutted our refugee system. It looked at refugees and said, we don't have the resources. We're not going to take any, we're just going to take maybe 1,000, maybe 1,200, maybe 1,500. That's it. We don't have the resources to take any more. Where other, first world countries are taking double or triple the amount that our country has taken. What the act is proposing re-looking at it and working with international partners and organizations to support and strengthen capacity in countries in the Western Hemisphere to process and accept refugees and asylees. It would provide support and technical assistance. It would also provide for better facilities. It would improve the way that refugees and asylees are registered into the system and improve capacity for them. See a question about the exception of the 1-year mandate for asylum seekers. So full disclosure, I'm not an attorney. I don't even get to play one on TV. I just hang out with them a lot. I work with attorneys. My best friend's an immigration attorney. My office is in the 3rd floor of the Esperanza Center. So I live with the attorneys. I absorb a lot of their knowledge by just the coincidence of working in that office. And I used to work for the Immigration Legal Services, and now I've kind of expanded my role. Exceptions to that 1-year bar for asylum seekers. So for instance, if you were sick, and I don't mean like you had the flu, I mean you were in a coma, or your child was really sick, or yeah, that's pretty much the exception. Like medical, something super, super serious. It not just like, I didn't know about it. I'm illiterate in my native tongue and I didn't know about it is not a valid exception. I didn't have the money is not a valid exception. I raised enough money to pay a public notary to apply for asylum for me and they didn't apply for asylum for me is not an exception. The exceptions for that 1-year bar, very, very low. And so there's different forms of immigration relief, right? So there's asylum, but there's also something called CAT, which protects people from torture. There's also protection for removal to a different country, right? So if you can't be granted asylum, but there's something a little bit different, there's different things, it's almost like an alphabet soup of immigration law, right? Like you look at all of the letters in the alphabet, A, B, C, D, you go down that list and there's a visa in that letter. And there's different forms of similar to asylum, but the one thing with asylum is that asylum grants you a path to your citizenship, right? You get asylum, you applied for asylum, you went to court, the judge granted your asylum application. A year after getting asylum, you are able to apply for your green card. 5 years after having your green card, you're able to apply for citizenship. With CAT, you're not able to do that. With the Convention Against Torture, you're able to stay here. You're not going to be deported, and you can get a work permit, but you're not going to be given that pathway to citizenship. So I got a message, is there a particular congressperson or senator from Maryland who can help overhaul immigration law? So I can't tell you who to vote for. I can't tell you who to advocate for. But what I can tell you is that when you think about the people that you vote for, when you think about the laws that you support, when you think about the interactions that you have with your legislators, don't just think about me. Think about your human brothers and sisters, right? We are all created in the likeness and image of God. We are all brothers and sisters. But when you think about me and what benefits me, you forget to think about your brothers and sisters, right? So if you see that one particular congressperson views your brothers and sisters as criminals, as rapists, is that somebody that you want to support? Do you see in your city that you live in, right? So I'm really lucky I live in Baltimore City. Baltimore City is a welcoming city. But you live in a city or in a county where the sheriff persecutes immigrants, and the county that you live in has agreements with immigration where they will detain immigrants for something as simple as having a taillight out. What is your role as a global citizen there? If you see that the city that you live in is entering into agreements to build detention centers, and detention centers, the overwhelming majority of the detention centers in this country are for profit. They are similar to the for-profit jails that we have that we know are inhumane. What is our responsibility there as global citizens? Are there particular Congress people and senators in Maryland? Of course. And it's up to you to decide, do I want to call them? Do I want to send them an email? Currently in Maryland legislation, we've got 3 bills that are tackling the issues of immigration. We've got the right to counsel bill, right? So currently, and this is nationwide, if you are somebody that commits a crime, you are eligible to an attorney if you cannot afford one, right? If I go out and I beat someone up and I can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed to me. Immigrants don't have that because immigration is a civil process. You're not guaranteed an attorney. And what we know is that if an immigrant goes to immigration court with an attorney, the likelihood that that attorney is going to be able to find immigration relief for them is much higher. And so right now, what is going to be heard in the next few days in Maryland legislation is a bill to guarantee representation for immigrants. There's also a bill about detention centers, right? Saying that we as Marylanders do not want our tax dollars to be used to build detention centers. We do not want to enter into any agreements to make more or renew any of these detention centers. There's also bills about trust, right? So if I'm undocumented and I apply for my driver's license, the DMV now has my information. And there's a bill asking that the DMV not share that information with anyone. It's asking for there to be a trust between the person that has applied for their driver's license and not have that information shared so that they are not at risk. And so locally and state, there's things that you can do. For instance, if you're a Baltimore City resident, our current mayor, when he was a city council person, proposed that people that live in this city, whether they be documented or undocumented, whether they be elderly or young, whether they be homeless or not, have access to apply for a city ID, to have a municipal ID that says, I am a human being and I belong to the city of Baltimore. I live in the city of Baltimore. But 3 different mayors have come and gone since this was proposed and passed, and we still haven't had a single municipal ID printed. So what can you do locally? Send him a letter and say, hey, Mayor Scott, remember when you did this? When are we going to actually see the process happen and be in fruition? Because we know that in order to access certain services, in order to enter certain government buildings, you have to have an ID. And what happened if when you came into this country, when you hopped on a freight train because you were fearing for your life, you left all of your worldly possessions back home and you now have no ID. And because of the pandemic, your home country isn't processing passports. You have no way to prove who you are. What if you are a 70 or 80-year-old person who no longer drives, who doesn't travel, and you don't have ID because your ID has expired, right? So locally, you can ask him, you can say, hey, Mayor Scott, you passed this, you advocated for this, now you are mayor. Can you do something about this? You can write your city council folks and say, hey, we've got immigrants that live in our county and have no access to food, have no access to testing, have no access to vaccines. What can you do for them? There are things that all of us can do locally. There are things that we can do statewide. There are things that we can do nationally, right? So for instance, yesterday we received news that after months of battle, folks that file taxes with an individualized tax ID number will be able to qualify for earned income if they have children. Previously, this wasn't something that was allowed to them. So no matter what folks will say, undocumented immigrants pay taxes and they don't have access to the same credits that US citizens do. They are giving money back into a country that is not going to give it back to them because they're not going to be able to get Social Security. And so whether the entire 2021 bill passes or parts of it pass, as a state, Maryland will be able to do something to help parents of US citizen children get some tax relief. And that's going to depend on Governor Hogan, right? Whether or not he signs this bill. Give me a quick second. I am going to look for the bill information and I'll put it in the chat box. And that way you all will know what bills I'm talking about and bills that you can still call, you can still send an email. If you're on social media, you can tweet about supporting these bills. So give me a quick second. So dignity, not detention, which is the bill that proposes ending immigration detention and ending contracts to house and create detention centers in Maryland, is HB 16. The right to counsel, so creating a way so undocumented immigrants that are seeking immigration relief is HB 750. And the Trust Act, which asks for state and local government to not participate with federal immigration enforcement, is HB 304. I am not a policy wonk, like I don't work in policy. But organizations like Casa de Maryland have a lot of information about these bills. So CASA is a really good organization. If you have questions about advocacy for immigrants, CASA in Maryland is your organization to go. So in the chat are the 3 different bills that you today, as a Marylander, could help pass. So, send a letter, make a phone call, tweet. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one. So you went through the Biden Harris proposal, their act. I'm not sure if they mentioned anything about the processing time. Interestingly enough, there are people who have made, sometimes I wonder if it's just a money making machine, or it's just that all the money people pay into immigration, and this is what most Americans don't know. It's not free. These things increase every day. And then you have somebody who have probably gone through the system, does their medical, whatever, and then they come after 2 years and tell you, oh, he expired. You got to go back to the doctor and do. So all of this backlog.
The bill is addressing it. The bill addresses some of the backlog. It's unfortunately not, like I said, I'm going to be very realistic, and I know parts of it are not going to pass, but it does address the backlog, because you're absolutely right. It takes years. And CIS, so the branch of the government that oversees immigration, is pretty much self-funded on fees, because like I said, for a TPS holder or a DACA recipient to get their work permit, you have to pay $495. $495 for me as a working adult is a lot of money. If I'm also supporting a family back home, it's even more money, right? Unfortunately, we have come to the end of the presentation. I am going to put my email, which I entered incorrectly. So I cannot type today. G Valencia Banks. Okay, there we go. The last email, cc-fd.org. That's my email. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. If you'd like me to present at your parish or at your social ministry organization, please shoot me an email. I will be happy to present or to talk. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email. I am going to go ahead and close out, and I will see you all back in the main room. Does anybody have any problems getting into the back room? Oh, Leslie, yes.
I had one question actually, but hopefully you could, if nothing else, we can talk about it offline. But you mentioned that once the virus hit, that no one was allowed in and they were being held at the border. And my question is, what was it, a policy that did that? What and did the U.S. pay for those people to be held? And how can one research that?
So it's MPP, Migration Protection Protocol, is what you're going to want to look into.
Okay.
And no, the United States did not house any of these immigrants at the border. They were in shanty towns, literally across the river, where they were exposed to disease, to violence. Right. So yeah, it's the Migration Protection Protocol, which has now ended.
Thank you. I just wanted to know, was the U.S. paying for them to be held?
No.
We did not pay them. Okay.
No, they were, on the other side of the border in, like I said, shanty towns. They weren't housed anywhere that's humane.
And when did the MPP go into effect?
During the previous administration, right before the virus hit.
So the virus wasn't even in existence, but they put that in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to say about a year before the virus hit. Don't quote me on that, but about that long. All right, all. It was really great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.